So a few months ago, I purchased an Xbox One from a few friends, but didn't really have much to play. All they had was Titanfall 2 and Shadow of the Tomb Raider, to which I own both on PS4. So on a recent outing, I picked up Quantum Break, nice and sealed for about $10. I knew Remedy developed it, so I knew I was going to be in for a nice outing. And before I officially begin the review, thanks Logan and Michelle for selling me the Xbox. Glad I'm finally getting around to using it. So yeah, Quantum Break. It's a relatively easy to play third-person shooter that focuses on time travel and modification, plot twists, and of course gunplay. You play as Jack Joyce, a guy who gets an invitation back to Riverport from, I think it was Thailand? It was some Southeastern Asian country that he was doing work for. The invitation was supplied by a good friend Paul Serene, who promised that he had a special project that he needed to show Jack. Come to find out, he has a full time machine, created based on, from what I understand to be, some sort of black hole mechanic. I can't get all sciencey here, as I'm still not 100% sure on how it actually worked, but the machine is created in a loop. Walking one way goes backwards in time, the other goes forward. It of course has limitations, which you'll learn throughout the game throughout its plot progression, but all you need to know is that the plot centers on this machine, along with what happens after. As much as I don't want to spoil anything, I will say that early in the game, as in within the first hour, once the time machine is kicked up, you'll learn that something goes haywire and time is essentially broken. Because Jack and Paul were near the machine, they get special powers that allow them to alter time around them, allowing them to contain almost superhero-like powers. A lot of the game is based on these powers, which I'll get to shortly. Just know that the game turns into a revenge tale, as Jack is now out to take down Paul, who, being that he traveled time previously, is now out to save the world in his own twisted way. Story plays a huge part in the game, which you'll find out quickly enough. In fact, that might be one of the biggest things that I was on the fence about in Quantum Break. The action is fairly light compared to the explorative nature of the game, to learn more about what's going on with the plot. There are plenty of collectibles to search out, in the vein of news articles, intel items, emails that are conveniently left open on random electronic devices, and so on. There's also plenty of areas where the actors play out the scene, just like pretty much any other game nowadays. The catch to this is that the game itself plays out like a television miniseries. Levels take place in acts, and in between each act, you'll actually be presented with an episode of live action to explain what's going on in the background. The acting is done extremely well, with Lance Reddick playing Paul Serene's right-hand man in Monarch Technologies. I never knew his name until looking it up just now, but I do recall seeing him in several shows, movies, commercials, etc. The whole TV series thing works well, but there is a catch. But before I talk about that, how about I mention how the gameplay works? It's a fairly standard third-person shooter, but Jack does get a few special powers. He has a dodge that dashes him to a few yards away. There's a shield that he can bring up for a short time that will both deflect all bullets and also, when upgraded, can heal Jack's damage quite rapidly. He can project the Time Blast, which is just a fancy way of calling it a magical projectile that does hefty damage. He can sprint through time and do melee attacks to enemies, and can throw an orb that slows time around it. And then when it collapses, all bullets zoom towards the center. These powers are slowly given to you over the progress of the game, with you earning the last ability around the middle of the game. Each time power has a cooldown timer, which are all shown on the right of the screen. Battles usually aren't too taxing on your nerves, other than maybe the few times you go up against the juggernauts with the battery on their backs. Some of the troopers also carry chronon harnesses, which allow them to navigate through time stutters, or moments where time will literally freeze. Jack isn't affected by these due to the events of the time machine, so it makes for some really entertaining firefights. I mentioned that time was a central mechanic to the game, and I wasn't kidding. Those time stutters are something that Serena and crew are trying to solve, and they're bracing for something he calls the end of time, where time will literally come to a full stop, and anyone without those chronon harnesses are going to be frozen eternally. You'll come to learn about something called the Lifeboat Protocol, and many of the characters of the game are going to be working towards figuring out exactly what it is and how it pertains to the end of time. Jack isn't waiting around though, and he's still busy on his path of revenge. So along with taking down Monarch thugs, he has to contend with random stutters. In these stutters, things will completely freeze and at times start to, for lack of better words, glitch. It's in these spots where you have to figure out how to maneuver through the environment. Large shipping containers will drop, and Jack will have to time his movement to navigate them. For the smaller objects, He can use the time freeze orb thingy to stop the item in place for him to move around it safely. There's not a lot of puzzles requiring this, but at times you will have to keep all of Jack's powers in mind. There's another thing that you can do to solve puzzles. View the past. At times you'll see a prompt pop up, and by holding Y, Jack will rewind time, usually to change the world around him, if only temporarily. This is used to get to areas that may have been off limits in the present time, such as repairing a broken pulley system to elevate a platform again. It's a pretty neat way to solve some puzzles, and again, none of them are old school point and click adventure game puzzle hard. There's one other thing to keep in mind when running around Riverport. You'll sometimes see your time site icon pulse. I should have mentioned that, but the time site can be brought up at any time by pressing Y, and will last until you move. It'll show you nearby targets, ammo, intel items, and so on. The normal stuff for this kind of thing. But more importantly, you can view conversations that might have happened in the past, both to solve puzzles and also just to learn more of the plot. And even more important, well, maybe just as, you can find chronon sources. By holding Y at these, Jack will absorb the power from them, and this is how Jack upgrades his time-altering abilities. Each source gives him an upgrade point, which are in turn spent on his skills. The upgrades require multiple points, and each has their own uses, so it's ultimately up to you in which way you want to make Jack more powerful. So remember how I said that the main gripe I have with the game is the way it plays out like a TV show? This works well enough, but there are times where I felt like the balance between action and story were uneven. Sometimes it would feel like there's an hour of story between 10-minute sections of action. If I wanted to watch a show on Netflix, I would do that, not elect to relax and watch a 15-minute episode of the game after getting the adrenaline going with a hectic time-slowing gun battle. I really want to like it, and I do, but I just wish there was a smoother balance to it. Could it be done easily? I have no idea, but I did want to mention it. There's a couple of other small things I want to mention. There seemed to be a Max Payne reference in the protest video in the start of the game. I thought this was an awesome cameo, if it was indeed Max Payne. Sure looked like him. Also, all the devices shown in the game were all Microsoft devices. Makes sense considering I'm playing this on Xbox. But for example, many of the laptops are Surface Books, or some version of it, and every cell phone in the game is a Windows phone. I'm probably the only person out there that noticed this. I kinda miss using my Windows phone, not gonna lie. Finally, there are some minor frame rate issues at times, mostly noticed during the live action scenes. That could also be due to the fact that the videos are streamed, not on the disc. But there were also times during the non-live action scenes that the frame rate seemed to drop a bit. The jitters don't kill the performance too much, but it is something I noticed pretty quickly. Finally, this whole end of time scenario, when you really think about it, it's kind of frightening. Sure, you won't exactly die, and probably won't notice it at all. But if you were one of the people immune to it, walking through a world that is completely frozen with everyone none the wiser about what's going on, it feels like horror in non-typical ways. I want to talk more about it, but I can't due to the risk of spoiling the story. And since it's a Remedy game, the game is heavy and in-depth with the story. But that's Quantum Break in a nutshell. Overall, the action might be a bit light and the lore heavy, but it is still a fantastic game to play. As an extra bonus, I got Alan Wake on the disc, which I have to check out yet, but I don't think I've played a Remedy game that I didn't like so far. Originally, Quantum Break was an Xbox exclusive, but it's now available on PC, so if you don't have the console, you can still have access to the game if you have a computer. If you're looking for a game that is heavy on interesting story and don't want to engage in brutal gunfights, Quantum Break might be the game for you. Final score? 6 out of 7. This is Reaper. Happy fragging.